My uncle's life is a disaster these past 2 years, and it's mainly due to his so called online girlfriend, Nancy. My uncle David has been alone for the better part of a decade. My Aunt June died in 2014, and while he stayed in mourning for years, he did date locally a few ladies he met through church, but nothing more than friendships came of his dating years. In the last 3 or 4 years, he had pretty much become a recluse in the sense he didn't go out on dates or dive into any of the social gatherings around town. My Uncle Dave is a mechanic who works on people's cars and trucks, and he works out of his garage on his property, so his home base is his whole life. His property is pretty big, and he owns his home, the garage, and all the land that it sits on. We all live in South Georgia. I live about 30 minutes from my uncle, and after my Aunt June died, I made it a point to visit him at least 2 times a month to make sure he's doing okay. Uncle Dave lives a bit out in the country, not in an isolated area, but not in a suburban area like where I live. So, besides his customers who need their car repaired, he doesn't see a ton of people. My uncle is 64 years old for the record, and it was about 2 years ago when I noticed some subtle changes in him. While I would always just show up to see my uncle, we always had this unspoken schedule where typically I would come by to see him the first Saturday of the month, and then mid month, typically on a Sunday afternoon around the 15th or so, I would come by for our Sunday dinner, and we usually would smoke a brisket. He would cook something for myself, my husband, and our son to come by and enjoy a family dinner. My uncle's quite the cook. And it's something that we've done for years. In between this, we would text, and if he needed something, he knew we're always there for him. But this changed in subtle ways. I'd shown up at my uncle's house on a typical first Saturday, and he wasn't home. Now, it's not unusual for him to leave to go to town or meet with a client who might have a broken down car. He was always going the extra mile for someone if they couldn't afford to have their car towed to his home garage. He would make what we always called Uncle's house calls to some people's homes to evaluate their car issue and fix it there if he could. So the first time this happened, I figured he was at someone's house looking at their vehicle. My uncle was always good for helping people when they needed it. The first occurrence, I left a few things on Uncle's porch. He had always had me pick up a few items at the bulk warehouse when I did my shopping. Sports drinks by the case, 2 huge bags of potato chips, and pop were what I recall leaving on his porch, along with a note saying I'd try to come back next Saturday if I wasn't working and say hi. The first time I'd heard any mention of Nancy was when I stopped by that following Saturday, and my uncle was in his garage working on a car. He mentioned to me that he was at the store when I had stopped by and that prior Saturday, and he was sorry that he missed me, but he had to go to the phone store to get a new phone. When I inquired why, and if he'd dropped his phone, which it wasn't unusual given his mechanic work, he was always spilling or dropping something on his phone, he told me that Nancy told him he should upgrade his phone to a new iPhone. When I asked who Nancy was, he confided in me that he had met a woman online named Nancy. He said that she was in a group on Facebook for classic car lovers, and Nancy had messaged him from the group, and they started chatting. He said Nancy told him that an iPhone would be better so that they could message easier, and she had an iPhone, and she said he would like it better. Now, to me, this is odd, as my uncle is not exactly Mr. Tech. He had a flip phone for the longest time before we spent the better part of a year convincing him to get a smartphone so that he could video chat with my son, who he absolutely adores, and receive video clips of my son playing football when he couldn't make it to his games. I asked him if she lives locally, and he explained that she is a widow, and her husband died while serving in the army in Afghanistan, and she's been alone for almost 15 years. She has a grown daughter who is 24, and while Nancy lives in Texas, her daughter lives in Florida. He said they've been chatting for a few weeks and really have a lot in common, including a love for classic cars, but he said Nancy likes import cars better. He said Nancy was 58 years old. At the time, I was a little surprised but happy for my uncle, and he seemed to be in a good space mentally. Fast forward a month, and my uncle was still doing his typical thing, but he was never home when we went to visit. And there were a few times I showed up on that Saturday and he'd be asleep. I woke him up on a few occasions and he said that Nancy and him were chatting all night and he was just trying to sleep. My uncle is very regimental and routine, so to find him in bed asleep at noon was very odd to me. But he was like a teenager in another sense. He was so happy to talk to Nancy, and he found someone to engage him in conversations that made him happy, and he was pretty isolated on the property. So, in a sense, I was glad that he was chatting with someone. I asked him a few times when Nancy and him would meet, or if she had plans to visit him, or would he go to Texas to meet her. He told me that they would meet soon, but Nancy was dealing with some issues with her father's estate. And he shared that her father had recently passed away, and she was working out the estate that he had left her. At the time, he didn't elaborate on the location of the estate, so I assumed it was in Texas, which is where he said she was from. This whole thing was going strong by the 6 month mark. He said Nancy was still working on her father's estate as it had to go through court, and then she would come and visit. I didn't have suspicions at this time because I know how sometimes courts, estates, they can get stuck in probate for months and sometimes years. The red flags, though, started going up about a month later. I had noticed my uncle was looking more and more disheveled in terms of not shaving, getting haircuts, and his yard, which was really kept tidy, was starting to get grass overgrown. When I asked him about the grass, he told me his mower had broke and he just didn't have time to get a new one. I told my husband this, and he came out one afternoon and mowed my uncle's lawn and had a pretty big yard, so it took a while, but our riding lawnmower made it look great. My uncle told us thanks and that he would get a new mower soon, as my uncle had a really nice John Deere riding mower that he kept up very well. So it struck me as odd, with him being a whiz mechanic, why he wasn't repairing it. My husband asked him what was wrong with the mower, and he would be glad to help him and take a look and get it going. And that's when my uncle snapped at my husband, telling him to stop being nosy and that it was broken, he got rid of it, and he'll buy a new one soon. My uncle was always a free and fun loving jokester guy, but this time he was stressed and very serious. My husband backed off as he could see Dave was getting frustrated and angry at the questions. My husband and I talked about this over dinner that night. I brought up how Uncle Dave was looking really rough. He was always clean shaven, and even though he was a mechanic with his dirty hands, he was an always clean looking guy. And lately, he looked anything but, including his shaggy hair, which was really unusual for him. I started showing up more often, checking in on my uncle. He would be working in the garage, and the one time I stopped in, he had 5 cars he was working on all at once, which seemed unusual as he typically worked on 1 or 2 cars at a time and really worked on them as a part time job slash hobby. It wasn't his livelihood. He had a good retirement. My uncle was pretty financially well off, so when I asked him why he was working on so many cars at once, he too snapped at me, saying he had to work hard and that he was saving money for Nancy to visit, as he wanted to take her on vacation once they met, and they planned on visiting her daughter in Florida together, so he wanted to fix more cars to earn more vacation money and have a really great time. His grass was once again overgrown, and I noticed there was no mower in his shed. I decided to take the ignorant approach and started asking about Nancy, saying how she must be so special. And I asked him, what does this special woman look like? Uncle Dave took out a few printed pictures of her that he had printed off his computer from her email. The photos of her were not what I expected. For being a woman in her mid-50s, she looked a lot younger in her photos. He said it was because she was a fitness instructor and a vegan and took lots of supplements and stayed healthy. The few pictures he had of her honestly looked like the type of photos you would take for a LinkedIn business profile or a professional business card photo. I asked him if she did her hair and makeup for him when they video chatted, and that's when I was concerned, as he said they couldn't video chat as Nancy was not in Texas right now. She's been trying to settle her father's estate and has been overseas and unable to video chat due to her location. Her internet's too poor for video. He then showed me his phone, which had pictures of Nancy's daughter, who was supposed to be living in Florida. The pictures of her daughter looked nothing like Nancy, not in any type of family resemblance. Not that some people don't look anything like their parents, but this was a photo of a young woman who looked like a model. When I asked him what her daughter does in Florida, he said she was a beach model, worked at a coffee shop, and she was going to school to become a nurse. When I asked where Nancy's father's estate is at, he said it was overseas, but she'll return next month. He said the estate is worth over $15 million, and she's having issues with the attorney and the taxes her father owed on the land. She plans on selling the land and the home her father left, and then would sell her house in Texas and move to Georgia. I could tell my uncle was annoyed with my questions, so I backed off and told him that I was just happy for him. I left it at that for the moment, but shared with my husband what I was told regarding this Nancy. My husband said it sounded off, but he's an adult and he can make his own choices, and we should just be happy for him. I told my husband that his grass was overgrown again, and my husband went out to mow one Saturday. My uncle wasn't home, so my husband mowed the lawn and then went to town to pick up some groceries on his way back. He said he saw my uncle's truck parked at the Verizon store. Now, my uncle, being a mechanic, drives a very specific baby blue old pickup, so you can't mistake it for someone else's vehicle. I just found this odd again, as my uncle, as I stated, is not a tech man. Seeing him at the Verizon store is very unusual. I texted my uncle to tell him we would be coming by for our Sunday family monthly dinner, but it was met with silence. Maybe he was having phone issues, and maybe I'm reading too much into everything. We did show up at his house for dinner, but was met with him not having anything cooking. Again, keep in mind, we came over like this for many years. I asked him if he had gotten my text, and he said he was too busy and asked what we wanted. I told him it's our Sunday dinner tradition day. My uncle said he forgot, and he was too busy talking to Nancy, and we can have dinner another time. This was alarming to me, and I offered to go to town and pick up a couple of pizzas. We could just have that instead and not to worry. But my uncle firmly said no. He said he was busy and he had no time to sit around, eat with us, and chat. This really hurt my son's feelings as he looked forward to coming over to my uncle's house and he loved to explore the garage, all the knickknacks, and run around the property. My uncle's phone rang and he told me he had to take the call and he walked outside. While he was outside, my husband and I both knew something was very off and very wrong. Uncle's kitchen was barren of food. My uncle was a potato chip and snack aficionado, and he always had a table full of snacks and cupboards full of food. I opened his fridge, pretending to get a can of pop, as my uncle's fridge has always been the place to grab your favorite pop. His fridge was nearly empty. No pop, no sports drinks, nothing other than I can recall a handful of miscellaneous food, and everything looked to be old. My husband and I both looked at each other and knew something's off. First, we thought maybe he was getting a form of dementia or memory issues, but no, it was deeper than that. On the fridge were those printed pictures of Nancy and her daughter. My husband snapped pictures of the pictures that were on his fridge. Uncle Dave came back in, and I joked with him, saying he needs to take a trip to Costco for pop and food, and kind of laughed and made it lighthearted. Uncle Dave snapped at me, telling me to mind my own business, and he prefers water from the sink instead of pop, and he was, quote, on a diet, and he didn't want to eat bad foods as Nancy wants him slim, healthy, and trim. Well, my uncle's not overweight. He's a normal-sized country guy. Typical 60-year-old man who's worked his whole life and eats good food. Chips and pop were his life, and this life has greatly changed. He shuffled us out of the house saying he had to work, had things to do, and that Nancy was going to call him back and he needed his privacy. My son was really hurt by this, and he told my son not to worry, that He would meet Nancy soon and she would be part of the family. This was getting weird. We left, and I told my uncle that I'll come back in a few days and drop off some pop and snacks as I was going to the warehouse store. My husband and I, once we got home, went into full blown detective mode. We checked Uncle's social media, and we were all friends on there. We wanted to see if we could find out who this Nancy was. Sure enough, he was friends with Nancy on FB. What was strange is I couldn't see Nancy when I searched on my social media profile for her, but on my husband's, I could see her. My husband's name is, say, Richard, but his social media profile is a nickname. Without giving up his identity, I'll give you an example for your viewers. If my husband's name is Richard, his social nickname on social media is Benny. So maybe Nancy didn't spot that, but she blocked me. We took a look at Nancy's profile, and it was very bare bones. Basically, her profile picture is the picture my uncle has on his fridge. Her About section only has that she lives in Houston and works at engineering. She has a handful of men heart reacting to her photos, and she has maybe 3 other pictures on her profile and a few photos of some sports cars that clearly were taken from some kind of website. She had another man who wrote on one of her photos asking where she was and that he missed her, but it was written months prior. Her likes and stuff were barren, and to me it just seemed off. My husband ran her photos through a few search sites and the photo of her so called daughter, and what came up was the daughter's picture was on a handful of adult movie actress sites. The photos of Nancy came up on a few dating sites with various names and ages and locations. This is not what we wanted to see. My husband and I agreed we needed to get to the bottom of this once and for all. We had made a plan to visit my uncle this coming Saturday with all of this information and confront him. A few days prior to the coming weekend, I went to our local paint/hardware builder store as we're in the process of painting our guest bathroom and putting in new cabinets. So I had to run to get more paint and some supplies. I ran into my uncle's friend, whom he worked with at a mechanic shop for many years. He and I just started chatting as you do, and he mentioned he really enjoys his new lawnmower that he bought from my uncle. When I figured it was the broken one, I asked him if he was able to get it going again. Puzzled by this, he said it works fine, and it worked when he bought it. That my uncle sold him a $5,000 mower for around $1,500. He said he needed to sell it because his girlfriend and him were planning on buying some land, and he needed the cash to put a down payment on the property, which is what he told his friend. I didn't tip off the friend that I was told a different story, and I just told him that I'm glad he likes it and that my uncle wanted a bigger mower anyways, or something to the likes of that. When I got home with my stuff, I told my husband what I was told. We decided that we would confront him on that Saturday. I brought my uncle some pop and food on Saturday with my husband, and we came with all the printed information on Nancy and her so called daughter, who the daughter's pictures were of, and of Nancy's dating profiles we found. We sat down with him, and I started telling him that I ran into his friend and we talked about the lawnmower. He said he didn't want the mower anyways, and he would buy a new one once Nancy got her father's estate settled. He said Nancy told him we could buy any type of mower or tractor that he wanted. When I asked about this so called property they were buying, he said that Nancy and him had plans to buy a vacation home overseas, and he sent her $1,500 for the down payment on the land as it was for sale, and if they didn't jump on it, that they would lose out on the deal of a lifetime. He then showed me a document he had printed off his computer of this so called deed to this land, which to me looked like a bad Photoshop. My uncle then said Nancy would be coming here soon because the attorney was finishing up the paperwork and the land was being sold for $15 million to the government as soon as she finishes paying the taxes that are due. I felt this was the right time to confront him and showed him pictures of her so called daughter, which belonged to really an adult film star. I then showed him Nancy's pictures on dating sites with various ages, different names, and locations. My uncle became angry, stating that Nancy was the victim of online scammers and they had taken her photos, and that she also had an ex she broke up with, and because he was abusive and cheated on her, he took her photos and put them on dating sites as an act of revenge, and that Nancy's daughter also had her pictures used by adult film industry, and an ex of hers did it for revenge for breaking up with him. I literally took my phone out and showed him that this so called daughter is really a film star and played videos of this woman. This is so and so, not Nancy's daughter. But he refused to believe us. He told me it's none of my business, and once Nancy settles her estate of her father, he was putting his house up for sale and moving to be with Nancy. I asked him if he plans on living in Texas, and he said no, that Nancy is scared of her ex who vowed revenge on her and the daughter. And the daughter is also scared of her ex. So all three of them are moving overseas where it's safer. When I asked him where, he said Nancy's father was a builder and he worked in the Nigerian countryside building roads and bridges, and he bought land there and lived there till he passed away. And Nancy said the country is great for retired people as the land is cheap. This had every red flag in his face. My husband asked if he's video chatted with Nancy, and he again became angry, stating that she can't due to being overseas. My husband said people can video chat from anywhere in the world, and that's not a very good excuse, and that this Nancy is probably a scammer. I asked him if he'd ever voice chatted with Nancy, and he said that he had. But he became angry with us, and he ended up playing a voice clip of Nancy and said that she leaves him messages all the time. The voice was clearly not of a woman from Texas, and while it was a woman speaking, it certainly was not someone from there. I told my uncle he's being scammed, and he told me that we were just lying to try and keep him here in Georgia. I told him I only want you to be happy no matter what, but I do not want to see you become a scam victim. I didn't care where he lived as long as he wasn't being scammed, and clearly he is. This turned into a full family argument, and he told us to leave. We left, but my husband and I came up with a plan. We went home and he messaged this Nancy. I also grabbed her phone number off my uncle's phone while he was playing the voice messages for us. It was a Texas number, but when we called it, it went to a free phone service recording to leave a message. We messaged Nancy telling her we knew what she was, and we messaged her on social media and on SMS via my husband's phone. And she, of course, blocked my husband on social media. She did reply to our SMS with a simple, "Who is this?" When I told her this is Dave's family and we knew she was a scammer, her reply was, quote, "Am not scam, go away." It was then the SMS messages started coming in from this Nancy with profanity, threats, and messages saying it's none of our business and that my uncle is her husband. Husband? When did they get married? I asked. She said none of our business and stopped responding. I tried several times to call and was met with no response, no answer. I left her several nasty voicemails telling her the jig is up and to leave my uncle and all of his money alone. I then received a call from my uncle saying Nancy called him stating that we were harassing her. He told us to leave his Nancy alone. My uncle told us off and stopped all contact with the family. I tried several times to reach out and we hear nothing. I made a profile and contacted Nancy, sending her a message telling her we've contacted the police. She responded with profanity and then blocked me. We did speak to the police about this matter, to which they said that my uncle is his own person, is an adult, and it's not our business. That they understand he's likely being scammed, but that neither they nor us can force him to stop contact with this Nancy. I did finally speak to a sheriff's deputy who we knew through this small town, and he did go out and speak to my uncle, but he said my uncle won't believe anything. At this point, it's been about 2 years, and my uncle has managed to sell off part of his land. His farm and yard equipment has been sold to several mutual friends, and he's totally shut off from the family. Through the grapevine, a few friends of my uncle have confided in us that he has told them he's trying to get Nancy home and that he has sent her thousands upon thousands of dollars because the taxes are due on her land and she's having trouble selling it. And one friend said Uncle Dave told him that Nancy's passport was confiscated by the Nigerian government for not paying taxes, and she's trapped there until she pays $100,000 in taxes. We've tried to get control of his finances and tried to file that he's mentally unstable and cannot care for his finances, but it's been a tough battle and so far nothing's changed. As of this email to you, Nancy is still actively taking money from him, and my uncle has dwindled his money down, his land, and personal items. I suspect he's likely sent this so called Nancy thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars. He has disconnected totally from his family, including my son, who he adored. We still reach out and invite him to football games and Sunday dinner meetups, but he never responds. This Nancy, or whomever is behind this, has a hold on my uncle and won't let go until he or she drains him of everything. None of his friends have gotten through to him, and it seems to be an endless struggle. To anyone who has family members in this situation, please don't give up on them. We keep trying to reach out any way we can to get through to him. So far, it's fallen short of a miracle, and that's what we need. Whatever this Nancy has done, she's got her claws in his wallet deep. I will update you if anything changes, but as of now, the money tree continues to be shaken by this Nancy. Thank you for allowing me to share. We'd like to thank this lady for sharing her story. Unfortunately, we hear stories like this quite often where family members are in so deep with a scammer that they don't know if they're coming or going, and they don't know that all their money is just slowly being dwindled away. If you'd like to share your story, whether you lost money to a scammer or a relative or friend that you're trying to help, we'd love to hear your story. Send any screenshots or information that we can verify, and we will narrate it into a video. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, always reach out and check on your friends and family, because sometimes when they live in isolation or they live a lonely life, they don't realize that they're being scammed, and they just love the attention and the affection that they're getting from someone online, and that online person could be a scammer. Stay safe.